World Trade Center.
Unbelievable.
Word now that a plane has crashed into the Pentagon. It has been evacuated along with the West Wing of the White House. The Treasury has been evacuated. The Capitol evacuated. The Sears Tower in Chicago has been evacuated. There was no threat of an attack against the Sears.
If you ask someone between the ages of, say, 25 and 40 where they were on 9/11, you'll probably get a different version of the same answer.
On 9/11, I was 13 years old. I was in 8th grade at Elkins Point Middle School in Roswell, Georgia.
So I went to school scared, but also pretty confused, and also just wondering, did everyone else see what was going on?
A classroom, a concerned teacher, getting picked up early from school.
But the teachers and staff wheeled in the old big box televisions that were on the little metal stands with the wheels into some of the classrooms so people could watch the news live.
It is completely impossible to understand why this is happening and to figure out what in the world is going on.
You can't talk about the impact that 9/11 had on our generation without acknowledging the fact that whether young adult or young child, we were all young. And whether it was college or kindergarten, many of us were in school when the world changed forever.
There were a lot of students that I saw that morning who were very visibly upset, very tearful, very distraught, worried about safety of family members, and this feeling of uneasiness of, is there going to be another attack?
Even President Bush was in a second grade classroom on 9/11. I was too. I was 7 years old, one of tens of millions of kids in America who grew up beside images of burning towers and collapsing buildings, left to live more of our lives reconciling with the destruction it left behind.
Children who have been affected by this find themselves years later not being able to trust that this is a safe and ordered world. But these children lost that ability. Remember, we don't enter into trauma. Trauma enters into us, and it entered into our children on 9/11 20 years ago, into our families, into our kitchens, over and over, because our children thought it was 20 planes, 30 planes.
Right. In many ways, 9/11 cast a shadow over how we learned every day after, laying much of the burden of navigating our new normal on our teachers.
So I am driving around South Orange, New Jersey right now. It is a suburb of Manhattan. So the people who live here are going to have just as vivid of memories and emotions related to 9/11 as the people who live in New York do. And that's because of the commuter culture here. I mean, if you think about it, the number of people that commute to New York for work, it's so many of them that they double the population of Manhattan when those people get to work. And the number of people that commute from New Jersey to New York, it's the most out of any two states in the country. So when you talk about people who have a connection to 9/11, they're going to be people that are here. And that's why we wanted to speak with teachers from here, because they can speak to that experience just as much as anyone else can.
9/11 is relived every day. It's in a sense that, if I hear a plane, yeah, even at my own house, because I live close to here, so I can hear the planes go, and I'm always questioning why the plane is so low, why is it so loud? It's a trigger, so it never goes away.
And actually, from South Orange, there are at the top of the hill, you could see the Twin Towers from there, and you could see them burning.
That's Terry Paisner. She taught in South Orange, New Jersey for 27 years. She had just started her 7th year of teaching in the fall of 2001.
It was a very traumatic day, I think, for all teachers.
We really did not have no one reached out to the teachers to say, this is what's happening, this is what you should be doing. So it was really left in our hands into what to do.
It made me feel alone. What do I do with all these kids?
All of these kids, meaning her classroom, full of students, more than a dozen 6- and 7-year-olds, including me. This is where I was on 9/11. South Mountain Elementary School, South Orange, New Jersey. Mrs. Paisner was the only adult in the room with me on that Tuesday morning in 2001. So, on another Tuesday morning, 20 years later, we got back together to try to piece back together what happened that day.
That morning started like every other morning. It was a beautiful day, and all of a sudden, a teacher came into the room and whispered in my ear that the Twin Towers were gone. And I just said, what? I said, what do you mean they're gone? And at the same time, I knew that I had to go about my day as if it was a normal day. I couldn't alarm the students. And I knew, like you said, you were 7, 8 years old. Some kids were even 6 years old coming into second grade. And I knew that I had a responsibility to keep them safe.
As the unthinkable unfolded in Lower Manhattan, less than 15 miles away, Mrs. Paisner did the only thing she knew to do. She kept teaching.
Mid-morning to late morning, and then even after lunch, a lot of kids started to go home. I don't know if you remember that. And the phone kept ringing, can you send so-and-so to the office?
Yes.
Can you send so-and-so to the office? And I remember sitting there, I don't know why, but I remember sitting with the easel. And we were doing something with the easel, and the students that didn't leave were like, what's going on? Why is everybody leaving?
Yeah.
And I said, well, it's the beginning of the year. Maybe, they had things to do that they didn't get to do. Like, I was trying to make up some excuses. That was also something that I had to, there was so many emotions going on at the time, so many questions. And really, we had no direction. So by the end of the day, we had like a half a class.
And that's what's interesting. That's probably my most prominent school memory, because I know my mom under no circumstances ever pulled me out of school. For me, not knowing what was going on, I didn't necessarily think that it was a big deal until my mom pulled me out of school, until it was, Ms. Paisner, can you send Ashley to, and I was like, oh my goodness, what? That for me in my second grade mind was like, something is going on.
Right.
Under no circumstances would she pull me out of school.
Exactly. And, and I think now since then, teachers have been trained in how to deal with a crisis like that.
Yeah.
Whereas before, that was never taught to us. Like, no one ever thought that would ever happen. So there was never any training. We were trained in teaching reading and teaching writing. Yeah. We were not trained in if there was an emergency situation, what to do.
The research reveals that children who've been through trauma, which is a life-threatening event or illness, do not process what happened to them or what they heard in the same part of the brain that we process normal events every day.
Dr. Norman Freed is a clinical psychologist specializing in trauma and bereavement. I met him at the National 9/11 Memorial in Lower Manhattan, where we talked about the response of teachers on 9/11.
So the world is definitely different when it comes to school.
Yeah.
Because I visit schools all the time and give guidance to faculty who are dealing with a loss, a suicide, a sudden death, or major events that we see on the news in the world.
Yeah.
The dynamic now is to tell your story and offer the children a forum for their story to be told and heard. And so we must continue the dialogue, not silence, but open the heart and the mouth for healing to come in.
Yeah.
Pain leaves, love returns.
Love did return to South Mountain Elementary eventually. Mrs. Paisner made sure of it, in spite of her fears about coming back to school the next day.
I was terrified to come back to the classroom. Not as far as safety, but in terms of what happens with the kids when they, when they're scared, I don't know if I have the tools to address all of that. And that was a fear of mine on September 12th. It was, what do I say to them?
I think the events of 9/11 in some respects opened the door both in the school systems and in communities for recognizing the need for mental health supports for children, because 5, 6, 7, 8-year-olds were having a door open to them to talk to the school psychologist in their school, to talk to a social worker. It was becoming part of the conversations. And I think that has just expanded as this generation has gotten older.
I think what's interesting is I didn't expect mental health to be such a prevalent part of this conversation, but of course it makes natural sense. And one of my memories is, so my dad was in the military at the time of 9/11. And so he was a part of cleanup. And I remember thinking, well, that's stupid. Why would they send him to where this bad thing just happened? Like, it can't happen again. Yeah. And so I don't know who I expressed that to, or if someone, I don't know, but I ended up going to the school psychologist. And I remember even then, they didn't have the tools to talk.
Correct.
To me. The only thing I remember, and I'm sure the lovely lady said more than this, why?
Because I feel for you.
Yeah. Yeah.
I felt for, Yeah. I think that what we want to say is we want to tell kids it's going to be okay.
Right.
And that is not something that you want to tell a student.
Right.
You want to acknowledge their feelings. I hear what you're saying.
Right.
I understand what you're saying. And let them talk it out. Because to tell them to be okay is almost, everything's going to be okay, is almost like whitewashing what they're feeling.
Yeah.
To them, it's not going to be okay. To you at that point, it wasn't going to be okay that your dad was going.
Yeah.
Right? So, even with my own kids, I never say it's going to be okay because I don't know when 9/11 happened. Again, it was 20 years ago. So we did not really think of students in the emotional way. It was more, let's teach them. And I think that after that, I knew I had to pay attention to that even more. And I think that is what I really changed going forward, is paying attention to those emotional needs of the students. Not that I didn't do that before, but now it became a forefront.
And 2 decades later, she was still paying careful attention to the emotional needs of this former student. And I wish that everyone who was a student on 9/11 could process what happened that day with their teachers. Because there's no denying the impact the attacks had on our childhood, and there's no dodging the fact that, for better or worse, we had to grow up faster in a lot of ways than other generations before us.
Innocence is a luxury for our children these days, partly because of what's going on in the world because of 9/11 and since 9/11. I will say, however, that with the loss of the early loss of that innocence is the early gain of wisdom. These children of this generation are going to be more equipped to be really amazing adults than we think about. And we have to hold hope that that is some form of a gift inside of all of this sadness.